Hello, everyone. I want to welcome everybody to another Talentville screenwriting webinar. I am Ben Cahan, your host. I run Talentville. I assume most people watching are Talentville members, so that's awesome. I'm glad you guys showed up to join us. The title of today's webinar is Write Like an Actor. And I sort of like to think of it as maybe write for actors or write so actors will respond to your writing positively. As screenwriters, we might think that if our script is good, everybody's, all the actors are going to want in. But I think today we're going to find out probably that there's a lot more to it than that. Now, when the topic was originally proposed to me, I thought, well, that might be interesting. We often talk about who we write for as screenwriters, the reader that's doing the coverage, then maybe the producer, and maybe the audience, in the theaters. But we don't so often talk about the actors who actually have to make our characters come to life and writing for them and thinking of them as an audience for our script. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized how important it is to keep actors in mind as we write. And because remember, actors can be the reason why our script gets produced or not. Get a big attachment, get an actor wanting to be in, and that certainly helps your cause a lot. If not, well, you know what happens then. Okay, to teach us today and talk us through all this is Matthew Currie Holmes. He's both a professional screenwriter and he likes to say a former professional actor, although he has a long list of credits there. But as such, as both someone who has had a number of his films produced and with a long list of acting credits, he's sort of uniquely qualified to talk not only about what may have attracted him as an actor to a role way back when, but also strategies for how to do your writing so that actors are interested in being in your movie. Hey, Matt.
Hey, friends. How are you? Hey, Ben. Thank you so much for that. Hey, friends. My name is Matthew Currie Holmes. I am a professional screenwriter and filmmaker with 25 years experience in the film industry. And like Ben said, I did start out as an actor. I was on quite a few film and television projects over the years. And when I started writing screenplays, I kept how I prepare as an actor as part of my my writing arsenal. And I discovered that as I was writing screenplays and talking to other screenwriters, the one comment that they would get would be, it doesn't feel lived in, or you got to do more with the characters. And so I thought, well, I think it would be kind of cool if I were to teach screenwriters how to write like an actor. Meaning, what do I mean by that? I mean, how does an actor prepare for roles? If a writer imbues themselves with this sort of knowledge and this sort of discipline, I can all but guarantee that your characters in your screenplays are going to come alive like they've never been before, and actors are going to respond to it. And the first thought they will think is, this person knows how to write characters. So I've created a presentation for you. I'm going to talk quickly because there's a lot of information. But like I said, I will answer any questions at the end of this, time permitting. And let's get started. So this is called Writing Like an Actor. Great. So welcome. So over the course of this webinar, I'm going to tell you how an actor prepares or what the actor's approach is, how to build characters sort of from the ground up, and just give you my closing thoughts. So an actor prepares. What does that mean? Well, Stanislavski once wrote The Famous Actors Prepared, and in it, he said, it is the process that actors use to fully embody a character, right? You want to understand their emotions, motivations, and inner life, and that's how they deliver authentic performances. They're not just reading lines and saying it the way they would say it, there's stuff going on inside. And what I want to show you is how to capture that stuff in the writing in and of itself. And the best way to do that is to put yourself in the shoes of an actor. So actors don't just read lines, they become the character, right? We understand their motivations, their emotional depth. But more importantly, actors need to know why they're doing it. If you've ever written a screenplay or directed a film, and sometimes an actor would say, "What's my motivation?" or "I'm not quite understanding the purpose of this scene." That means that the actor, clearly doesn't have an objective. Now, this is, 80% of this is the actor. If you don't have an objective, you got to figure it out. But sometimes, it's not on the page. And if it's not on the page, then we need to sort of just, create something that is so effusive that they are not even going to question what their motivation is. They're going to come with an idea, they're going to be fully prepared, and they're going to deliver a performance because they know, based on what's written in the scene, what the objective is. And the way we do this is like I said, we go into the mind of an actor. So we figure out how actors prepare for roles. So what do? They break down a script and they develop a character's inner life. And then I'm going to show you what's called the judge and justify method. This is basically what this means is the judge is how everyone in the script sees this character, their character traits, their behaviors, and the justify is how the character sees themselves. And then I'm going to show you how to break a script down just the way actors do, and we're going to build a character bio. And I strongly urge every one of you to build bios for characters that are that exist in more than 3 scenes in your screenplay. If you've got like the waiter who comes in and says, "Hey, can I take your coat?" You don't have to create a bio for them. And the bio is not something that you necessarily need to explain. It's just something that they do internally that will inform the decision. And I'll get to that in a second. So there's 3 really great techniques. I mean, there's many techniques, but I'm going to choose the 3 great techniques that a writer can, sort of incorporate an actor's process into this. And the one is called the magic if, right? It's an acting technique where the actors ask themselves, if I were this character in this situation, how would I feel and react? So this just allows them to step into the character's reality if they haven't personally experienced it, right? Like a lot of people, people who play serial killers probably don't murder people in real life, or people with trauma, or people, pilots. Generally, I've never flown a plane, but I can act like I can. So they ask questions, right? This helps the actor emotionally connect with the role. It creates an authentic and believable performance by grounding the emotions in a real experience. And it encourages actors to explore how different circumstances might change their reactions, right? So how do we apply this as a writer? Well, first of all, I want you to look at a scene. I want you to choose a moment in your script where a character must make a decision or react emotionally. And then I want you to step into their shoes and just ask yourself, if I were this character, knowing what I know, experiencing this situation, how would I feel? And then just consider the physical and emotional reactions. Like, would they freeze? Would they lash out? Would they shut down? Would they get defensive? And then adjust the scene accordingly. Right? Make sure that the dialogue and the body language, if you want to show body language, and actions align with the emotional truth that they've uncovered. So I have an example here from one of the all-time greats. This is Aliens, 1986, James Cameron's film. Ellen Ripley, one of the great heroines of our time, just asked the question, she asked the question, what if I survived an alien attack, but were forced to face the same monsters again, but this time I'm responsible for an entire team? It's a great question, right? So you might initially resist, right? You might not want to go because you're clearly, PTSD or you're haunted, right? You could struggle with these things. You could question, am I strong enough to face them? Can I do this again? You might find yourself taking charge because you actually know what you're up against, right? And it's not because you want to, but because no one else is capable. Right? And you could form an unexpected bond with the survivors, right? Like Newt, the child in the movie, right? And this could awaken your protective instincts. You might realize that the only way to truly overcome your fear is to confront it head on, leading to your transformation as a warrior. This is what an actor would do Okay, is this? These are the questions that they would have, and then they answer that. So if you do the same thing, if you create a magic if for your characters in a given situation, you will be able to, the answers that you come up with, you just give them to your character. Another great technique that actors use is the objective versus the super objective. Now, what do I mean by that? So the objective is what an actor or a character wants in a specific scene, right? While the super objective is their larger goal. It's their character arc. It's the thing that drives them through the whole story, right? See, actors use these to shape their performance, and they ensure that every action and line of dialogue serves a purpose. So why do they do this? It gives them clear motivations, because when they know sort of what they're doing, it feels intentional, right? Rather than random or luck that happens. And you always want your characters, specifically your protagonists, driving their own choices, making all these, like, you don't want all these things to happen to them and, oh, wasn't that lucky? And then they just sort of go on their merry way. They need to be in charge of whatever's happening, and whatever obstacle that they face needs to set them back. But they need to always be making decisions, not always the right decisions, but they always have to be in control of their own narrative. And a great way to do that is to have a motivation as to why you're doing the thing that you're doing. So this creates tension and conflict when objectives clash between characters, because as we all know, the protagonist has an objective, the antagonist has an objective, and they're not aligned. If they were, it'd be a buddy-buddy film. Instead, you got this, right? So this helps actors and writers understand why a character behaves the way they do in a scene. So how do we do this as a writer? Well, we define the super objective, right? We want to look at a character and we want to say, okay, what's the ultimate goal that this character has in the story? Like, what is the purpose? What is the reason they're doing any of these things? Is it redemption? Is it love? Is it power? Is it survival? And then you break it down. So we hit the macro and then we go to the micro and we say, we look in every scene. You say, what does my character want right now? And then you want to check for conflict. Do their scene objectives and super objectives align or clash? If they clash, well, congratulations, you've created inner conflict, right? Which is fantastic. And you always want to write with purpose. Like, as writers, once you ask these questions, once you say, what does my character want? Actors would say, what does my character want? But what does my character need? All of these, we're all saying the same thing, right? So with these questions in line, then just write your scenes with purpose. You want to ensure that every line of dialogue or action is pushing or struggling against these objectives. A good rule that I like to have is, from the front half of your script, your character is going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Then towards the back half, so from the break in 2 all the way to the third act, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So they're going, yeah, we got this. Oh no, shit's going bad, right? And then, of course, at the lowest moment, they make a decision. Boom, your climax. Unbelievable. They either obtain their objective or they fail spectacularly. Now, your hero doesn't always have to win. Your protagonist doesn't always have to win. You don't always have to put a bow on it, but the attempt has to be intentional and just full-throated. So I hope that makes sense. So I chose something that is a little more complex, with an inner conflict rather than external, because it's easy to say, Brody and the shark from Jaws, right? The shark's objective is just to eat, and Brody's objective is to kill the shark. But his internal one, like his super objective would be like, I need to overcome this fear of water. But I chose something a little more subtle, a little more internal, which was Nina Sayers from Darren Aronofsky's heartbreaking, terrifying ballet horror movie called Black Swan. So the super objective for Nina is to achieve perfection in ballet and to prove herself as the ultimate partner. And what's kind of going against her externally is her mother's constant barrage of criticism, the fact that she's kind of aging out, and then there's this new superstar that's coming up. These are the external things, but what is the internal things? She says, I am going to do this at all costs. So each scene that she does is to make sure that everything is perfect so that when she does her final performance, she has fully embodied the role of the Black Swan. Now, the internal conflict is that she loses or she goes batshit, right? And she blurs reality and delusion, and it leads to absolute self-destruction in pursuit of her artistic transcendence, right? So by defining both objectives, writers can ensure that every scene drives the character forward and builds natural conflict. And in this case, you have external and you have internal. Of course, I focused on internal because I think internal is much more interesting, and actors really respond to that. So the next technique that actors use is like an inner monologue or subtext, right? Now, a lot of writers have a hard time creating subtext in their scenes. And when you see an actor perform, what's interesting is, so the way an actor does it is they will, you know what, I'll show you this in the breakdown of the script, but basically they're kind of looking and they make a choice, right? There's the lines, this is what's said, but what's really going on underneath? And what is ever really going on underneath is how they're going to play the line. So for example, if the line is "have a nice day," an actor could choose to be, "Oh, have a nice day." Or they could say, "No, I'm really angry. You know, have a nice day." You know what I mean? And then that colors the performance because that's the subtext of what's going on. So how do we do that as writers, right? So what we want to do is we want to identify what the character wants to say and what they actually say. Just like I said, you know, what is my character thinking versus not verbalizing, right? And the reason we do this is because we want to create layered performances for the actor. This adds depth, this creates tension and intrigue, and it ensures that dialogue isn't too on the nose, right? Like, "Hi, have a nice day," or, you know, "Oh, how are you feeling?" "I'm feeling angry." You know, like imagine if they say, "How are you feeling?" and they're laughing. "I'm feeling angry." Like, you would look at that and go, wow, that's really crazy. So how do we write that, right? Well, there's a technical way we can do that, which is in the parenthetical. So when you have a character and just underneath you create a parenthetical, what I usually do is I put in the parenthetical the emotion behind the line. It's basically like giving your actor a line reading, right? So if the line is, "No, I'm feeling great. I'm really looking forward to having some ice cream and then watching some Netflix and chilling out." If that's the line and you put in a parenthetical right underneath manic, then the character is going to deliver something preferably comedic at that point. So you're going to want to identify what are they saying versus what do they mean, right? Also, you want to use actions to reveal this truth, right? So instead of stating emotions outright, let the body language or pauses or small reactions hint at their inner monologue. Now, you want to be careful with reactions because we don't want to over direct our actors in the scene, but you could do something like, you know, Joey paces back and forth frantically delivering, "No, I'm fine. I just am looking forward to getting that ice cream and then going to watch Netflix and chill out," right? And then that action is going to tell the character, "Oh, this is how I can kind of do this." It puts it in their body, right? So you can also add hesitations, little beats, right? Anything that will reveal the opposite. So a good technique is something that you can practice is take a look at your characters and see what the line is, even if you know how they're intending to say it. What I want you to try and do is just look at, you know, a line of dialogue and give them the opposite emotional response to the line that they're saying, even if it's not what's in your script, even if you want them to say, you know, "Be happy," or no, you know, whatever, just as a test to see how that feels. And then I want you to say that line out loud as if you were the actor playing the part, right? So, "Hey, I'm fine. I'm looking forward to getting some ice cream. I'm going to go home and watch Netflix and chill." I want you to go, okay, how can I say it in different ways? Say it angry. Say it manic. Say it sad, like you're crying. And then what you're going to experience is you're going to see how, oh, this might be an interesting way to say this line, right? Another way to do it is if you have a line of dialogue that is completely, you know, on the nose, like if someone is sort of, you know, really sad, instead of using the line that's like, you know, "How are you feeling?" "I'm not fine. You know, all I wanted was ice cream and just to watch Netflix, and now everything's gone and my life is terrible." If that's actually the line, then do the opposite with the emotion. Change the line to something completely positive. almost antithetical to what's on the page. Now, this is an exercise. You don't actually have to do this in your script, because your characters might not, it might not be the way that they want to do things. But what it'll do is it'll show you how to connect with an inner monologue and subtext, right? Because as writers, we are often dedicated to pushing the story forward. And therefore, when we push the story forward, you know, the sort of shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right? Well, in acting, you don't want the shortest distance between 2 points. You want a point up here, a point down here, a point up here, a point, you know, well, we're going all over the place here. And then finally we get to the place that we want to get to, right? Because that's what makes it interesting. And a way to do that with your screenplay is just to look through all your dialogue and do those 2 exercises, just to play with it, right? It's going to awaken something where you're like, oh, maybe I can do this, right? This will automatically create a contrast between your words and thoughts, right? And it may seem arbitrary, it may seem like a lot of work, but I guarantee you that once you start this in practice, you'll never write characters the way you did before. You'll always write them this way, and it'll come very naturally eventually, so that subtext isn't the problem. So here's a great example. We got Michael Corleone from The Godfather, right? Now, his inner monologue is he does not want to be like his father. He even says that outside, right? He's like, I don't like, he states it very early with Kay at the wedding. I'm not like my father. I'm a soldier. I'm coming in. And the subtext is that during his father's hospital scene, he insists he's not like the family, right? This isn't my fight. I'm not doing this. I'm blah, 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 you know, with Sonny, and Sonny's like, I'm going to shoot everybody and we're going to kill everybody. And he's like, no, we're not doing this. But what does he do? He stands guard, right? He's taking control of the situation, even though he's like, no, I don't want to be like the family. And Sonny even says at some point, it's like, you're not even in this thing. You don't even care. You haven't been here for so long. And I mean, ultimately, what does he do? He goes and shoots someone and heads back to Sicily, right? But what the audience sees is that there's an internal struggle without him ever explicitly stating it, right? Like, family's forever. Like, I hate my dad, even though that's not what he's saying. And yet he's at his side. That's a really great juxtaposition. So if you can master these sort of inner monologue and subtext, this will help you create dialogue with deeper meaning and characters with real emotional complexity. And another way to do this is to write actions that are antithetical to the situation. So I hope that helps. So now I want to talk about building characters, right? How do we build a character? How does an actor build a character? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we start with judge and justify, right? This is sort of the bass notes. This is starting of the song. You get the little rhythm. Great. You hit this place here, your characters are already going to be 25% better than before doing this, right? So this is a technique that shows how the world perceives them, which is judgment, versus how they see themselves, justification, right? So judgment is an external label. They don't judge themselves, right? People are going to judge them. They place, you know, even the audience will place these judgments on a character. Well, justification reveals why they are who they are, right? Behind their actions, like why they do what they do. So what this does is this just shows in bright 4K the flaws and strengths of a character, right? It just reveals everything. It adds depth and emotional complexity, right? So this prevents, pardon me, one-dimensional portrayals. And it also helps writers understand why characters behave the way they do, leading to more natural and engaging storytelling, right? So here's what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to identify the character trait, right? Who is your character? I mean, we've all, when we start writing, we definitely have the big, oh, you're kind, the one line in your log line, or the one line that sort of describes who the character is, right? Without objectifying them, right? Just their behavioral traits. So you can choose a defining behavior, confidence, kindness, recklessness, whatever it is. It's them. That's what they have. Then you judge it, right? Like, how do others see this trait? So for example, confidence can appear as arrogance or dismissiveness. And then you justify it. Why does the character behave this way? Well, arrogance could be a defense mechanism, right? To hide insecurity. And already your character is just like, I call it the 7-layer bean dip, and very few actors hit all 7 layers. I can think of like 3 off the top of my head: Meryl Streep, Daniel Day-Lewis, and more currently Adam Driver. They're the ones who just kind of go all in with these 7-layer bean dips. But already you're down to the 2nd or 3rd bean dip, and actors are going to read this and go, oh, I love it, right? So you just apply it to dialogue and action, and you just make sure that the justification subtly influences their words, choices, or reactions, right? You don't want to say something like, see, I told you I'm great, but what do they do? Like, so, well, you know what? I'll just show you an example. Here's a great example. Miranda Priestley from The Devil Wears Prada, speaking of one of the great actors of our time, the incomparable Meryl Streep. This is a great character. If you haven't seen The Devil Wears Prada, it's, you know, there's the kind of B story I think is lacking, but man, Meryl Streep is just, it's incredible. So the judgment, how do others see her? Cold, ruthless, impossible to please, right? She is just completely driven, will chew you up and spit you out, right? But this is how she sees herself, right? She's a woman in this industry, dominated, right? She believes that perfection is necessary for this industry. And if you show vulnerability, it would undermine her authority, especially as a woman running this, right? Her high standards, they aren't cruelty, they're survival tactics in a competitive world. And a great scene that shows this justification, which I thought was wonderful if you haven't seen the movie. It's when Anne Hathaway, they're looking at a rack of clothes, and she pulls out, like, you know, she says something like, what color is this? And Anne Hathaway goes, blue. Oh, is it? Is it just blue? Says Miranda. And then she goes and talks about the subtle differences between each blue outfit, the cut, and why the designer chose that specific blue on that time, and why the scarf matches this thing. And it's just, she just takes her to school, and it feels like, you know, just a Mensa intellectual shellacking, right? And it completely humbles and at the time humiliates Anne Hathaway's character. But really what she's doing is she's teaching. She's like, look, I take this very seriously, and this is why. This is not just fashion or whatever. This is important to me. So if you look at it the other way, you know, while she appears heartless, she has moments of subtle vulnerability, right? It's like when she has that breakdown on the phone in Paris, she just cries for like 15 seconds and then gets up and go, because you want to reveal, you know, and it had to do with her husband. You want to reveal the depth beneath her exterior, making her more than just a stereotypical mean boss, right? Like that everything that she projects is a projection, and everything that she feels is, you know, she's masking that. And when you add judge and justify to your screenwriting, character, like actors are going to be like, awesome, I get it. The whole goal is to have an actor not say, what is the scene about, or what are my intentions? You know what I mean? Like it's all going to be there on the page in rich subtext and textually, right? So by using this, you can create these characters who are real with inner conflicts, and they will just drive their story arcs. Now, I'm going to be using one of my favorite movies of all time, and one of my favorite characters of all time, John McClane from 1988, John McTiernan's classic Christmas movie. It is a Christmas movie. I will fight you on that. Die Hard. If you haven't seen it, please, just after we're done watching this, just watch Die Hard, because it's sensational. Now, the reason I want to choose this is because on the surface, you have Bruce Willis, who plays John McClane, and he's, you know, it's an action movie, right? If you watch Die Hard, it's an action movie. There's a lot of action, big stunt shooting, one-liners, quips, and it's entertaining as hell. But what makes this movie so compelling, and what makes John McClane particularly an interesting character, is that he has a giant beating heart inside of his chest, and he is a flawed human being. And he does not have the, you know, armor that he's projecting. And the way they do this physically, by the way, is by having him run around with no shoes on, right? And showing just visually, I mean, it's almost way too on the nose, but the fact that he's got no shirt, He's got one gun with X amount of bullets. He has no shoes or socks. Immediately puts the audience in fear of him because he's vulnerable. He's practically naked, right? So every time he comes up with a one-liner, every time he kind of does something, it's an even bigger win because it's like, wow, the dude with no shoes, and he can't even find shoes that fit. Anyway, if you haven't seen it, you should just see it. But that's a great example of showing sort of the subtext, right? So if you were writing your character description, as we do, this is what we should all be doing as writers, right? We should be writing one of these. Now, if you've ever acted or if you've ever seen a script breakdown from a casting director, if you've ever been to an audition, the audition is going to look something like this. Like if you're auditioning for John McClane, there's going to be this stuff here, right? A description of the character. And what I want you to do is I want you to start writing these descriptions down, like really creating these descriptions. And I'm going to show you the certain techniques in doing that. And the first is the judge and justification. So we have John McClane, 30s. He's seen it all, right? That's a judgment. New York cop with a wicked sense of humor. He's an asshole. Again, judgment. But very good at being a cop and knows that the best way to get information is to get a rise out of people. That's why he's an asshole, right? But it's not so great for his merits. John begrudgingly, he's judging, decides to come to Los Angeles to try and reconcile, right? So he's like, I don't want to go there, but the reason I'm going there is to reconcile. His wife, Holly, he's resentful of his wife's success and in some ways thinks that it's a failing on his part as the man in the relationship, right? Here's the thing. Well, actually, I was going to say we don't know that that's true, but we do because there's a great line in Die Hard where they're having their argument at the beginning. And he says, since when did you start using Gennaro, your maiden name? And they get into an argument and he's like, well, I just, it's not, you don't know what my idea of a relationship is. And she goes, I know exactly what your idea of a marriage is, right? And that whole line just says, you're this guy, I'm this woman, but clearly you're this way, I'm this way. And clearly you can't handle how I am. So he could judge himself and say, well, how did I fail as a man, right? Which is great because when you have a judgment, the sort of opposite of the judgment is also your character arc. So he says, look, it's a failing of his part as a man in the relationship. Still, John wants what's best for Holly, which is sort of antithetical to how he feels about himself, inner conflict. So this is a great first draft of just using judge and justification of how your characters. And if you were to give this to an actor, they would immediately have ideas on how to play this. But we're going to go further. So the next thing an actor does when they get a screenplay is they break it down. Now, what does that mean? It's not just, they look through and go, my line, bullshit, my line, bullshit, which is, if you're an actor, it's kind of a big actor joke. They don't actually just count all their lines. I mean, some do, but generally speaking, they're going to look and they're going to break down and they're going to look at their motivations, emotional stakes, and hidden subtext, right? They're going to go beyond what's written on the page to fully understand how a character thinks, feels, and reacts in every scene. Now, we as writers can also apply this same process to create characters with depths, consistency, and truth, right? So the purpose is to have clear motivations because sometimes it's not on the page, and that's not a terrible thing for it not to be on the page, what the motivation is. Because it is an actor's job to come up with that, right? Like do the work, actor. So they will come up with motivations and they'll try something and then the director might be, wow, what made you think to do that? Oh, I was thinking of this. Okay, great. And then let's scale it back, right? Because the performance is the first, that's the first thing. That's the first thing that gets directed, right? An actor does something, makes a choice, and then the director either adjusts or goes, damn, perfect, right? That's what a director does, right? It's like it's like if you were conducting John Coltrane, right? And he's going off, he's playing the sax and it's incredible. And then suddenly he hits a note that the director's like, well, hey man, I see what you're trying to do here, but let's maybe, go back this way. And then he does it again and it's even better because the director just made a small adjustment, right? But the reason they need motivations is because they need to have consistency in character behavior. That is the big problem with a lot of scripts. There's inconsistency in why characters do what they do. And we want to create that super objective. We want to make sure that written on the page, we have consistency. Now, why actors do this is because when you're shooting a movie or when you're shooting something, you're not shooting it in order, right? You're shooting via the location. So if 5 scenes happen in one location, you're going to shoot out that location first. I'm speaking as a filmmaker now, rather than shoot in order and go from this location to this location to this location back. So they shoot out the location. So the actor has to keep track of their emotional experience, right? So they're breaking down what happened. They go, okay, what happened before this? What's happened? Okay, great. So now I know what's before, even if they haven't shot it. Even if they shoot the one scene, that's here in the house, and the scene before, they watched their brother die. Now, we didn't shoot that scene yet, but they have to come with it. They got to go, okay, I know what happens before in the script, so I got to bring that emotional resonance, right? This is why they're doing these things. This is why they break it down. How do we do this as a writer? Once again, you identify a given circumstance, right? The facts that you already know about the character. It's in the script. Where are they? What happened just before this scene, and what happens next, right? Determine their scene objective. What does my character want in this moment? Identify the obstacles. What's stopping them from getting what they want? Then you're going to analyze your subtext. What are they thinking about but not saying? How does this affect their dialogue and actions? And most importantly, track their emotional changes. How does their mood, perspective, or goals shift from the beginning to the end of the scene? So a great example, Sarah Connor, T2. I mean, once again, James Cameron. Here's your given circumstance. She's locked in a mental institution right at the beginning of the film, and nobody believes her about the oncoming apocalypse. So her objective is to convince, her objective prior to this was to convince everyone that, this is happening. It's not working. So in this scene, she wants to let everybody, she realizes you guys are going to do what I need you to do. So I got to figure out a way to get the hell out of here. So she's trying to convince the doctor that she's sane enough to be released, right? Problem is, she's got a short fuse. She has these violent outbursts, and her reputation clearly works against her, when she stabs the guy with the pen. So what does she do? She's obviously not calm about anything. She knows that this is happening and it's TikTok. So she acts calm and rational, but the rage and urgency bubbles beneath the surface, right? So what happens is she snaps, right? So everyone's going to have a pretty bad day. I hope you're bringing sunscreen. It's a great line. And she reveals the true desperation when she realizes they're not going to let her out. And then she stabs the person with the pen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That is what an actor would do. Just be like, oh, okay, here, because the actor could basically say, yeah, I want to get out of here and see my son. I want to get out of here and see my son. But they're like, well, that's what you want, but you got to convince the people that you're okay. So as a writer, we're saying, okay, that's what she wants. So how do we write it? Okay, hey, you know what? I'm doing just fine. Everything's great. I haven't had an outburst in 6 months. I've been very good. I think that maybe I was a little off base before, but now I'm calm. You know what I mean? Still, that's her objective. And obviously the arc of that scene is when she snaps. So if you break down scenes the way actors do, everything has weight. So now we're going to expand the Die Hard description, right? This is what you're doing here. You're doing these descriptions. So now we're going to add behavioral traits to the judgment and justification, right? John McClane, Seeing It All Judgment, slightly cynical, right? That's how he projects. New York cop with a wicked sense of humor. That's how he projects. He's super arrogant. And once again, here's that projects word, projects sarcasm, and an asshole, right? So all this stuff here, cynical, wicked sense of humor, super arrogant, all these behavioral traits, this is what you're going to want to put actually in your script when you're describing a character. You don't want to say beautiful, gorgeous, pretty, but doesn't know it, handsome, studly. It's Hollywood, folks. Every actor in the world is going to look amazing on screen. So you don't need to put beautiful or ugly. You just, when you're writing a character, John McClane 30s, just say slightly cynical, wicked sense of humor, New York cop, right? Immediately gives an actor something to latch onto. They're not going to latch onto what they look like. In fact, if you write the words, pretty but doesn't know it, and I'm saying this mostly to male writers who are writing female characters, oh, she's pretty, but doesn't know it. Every actress that reads that script is going to roll her eyes and go, oh God, okay. Because actors can't act a thought or, what does that mean? Pretty, but doesn't know it. Oh, I don't know that I'm pretty, but I really am pretty. Like, they can't act that. That's an opinion. But I digress. He's an asshole, but that's because he's very good at being a cop and knows that the best way to get information is to get a rise out of people. Not so great for his marriage. John has begrudgingly decided to come to Los Angeles to try and reconcile with his wife, Holly. He's stubborn and will never admit it. That is a behavioral trait. But he's resentful of his wife's success and in some ways thinks it's a failing of his part as the man in the relationship. He's at odds with these emotions and loves his wife. But despite his tough guy, wise ass veneer, John just wants the best for Holly. Actor reads that and they're like, I got this. I can do John McClane. But we're going to go one step deeper, which is adding a character backstory and a biography. Why do we do this? Well, why do actors do this first, right? This is a personal history that shapes who they are before the story begins. And it includes their past experiences, relationships, and defining moments that influence how they think, behave, and respond to challenges. Now, you do not need to include every detail of this. And you don't need to have a scene that says, well, back in the day, I was, physically abused by my alcoholic stepfather. And that's why, you don't need to do that. In fact, don't. No actor wants to read that and say those lines. It's laying pipe. It has nothing to do with the story moving forward. It just informs how the character makes decisions, right? So here's a good test. Go back to your script and everything that you've explained as backstory, if it does not purposely move the story that you're telling now forward, get rid of it. You don't need it. But you can put it as a character trait and you can figure out ways how they would react to a situation. Right? So this gives characters emotional depth, right? They're rooting their choices in past experiences, right? Past is prologue. It helps to understand why a character acts or reacts a certain way. So someone who thinks they're a failure as a parent will react very differently than somebody who thinks they're the best dad in the world or they're a superhero, right? This creates internal conflict and motivation, and it drives the story forward. These are why actors do it. So how do we do this as a writer, right? You just simply ask questions. What life experience shaped this character's worldview? Childhood, family, education, place of birth, key relationships, right? Determine their wound and their want, right? Now, this doesn't mean that you have to have some sort of horrible traumatic thing happen, but there is a wound. And so it could be a phobia, right? Like they could be they fell into, like Batman is a great example. Falls into the thing with the bats and the bats swirl around him and he's afraid of bats. And then of course, what he wants is he wants to overcome all fear. So what does he do? He puts his, Bruce Wayne builds his underground lair in a bat cave, overcoming his fear, right? There's even a scene where he just sort of stands up with all the bats. But that's his wound, right? He's also that's the wound of his parents being murdered, but that's another wound, right? So when you determine their wounds and wants, it's what past pain affects their present versus what do they want, what do they want to do to overcome it, or what do they do to overcome it? Sorry, that's a typo. So another way to do this is to define their present past, which is what happens just before the story starts, right? That pushes them towards the inciting incident, right? It's not what happens before the inciting incident, it's what happened just before you hit fade in. Every actor on stage, before they come on stage, they're not just it's not oh, Matthew Currie Holmes is just being me, hanging out, and then suddenly I go up on stage and I'm in character. No, I think about, what did I do just before this? Okay, so in the play, I'm running in, and I'm about to tell everybody some news. So I got to remember, how do I react to the news that I heard? That's not in the play, but I'm oh, I reacted. Oh, I was really excited. Oh, and I was also really scared. And you know what? Oh, I almost missed my bus, right? Okay, so that's what happened to me just before this scene takes place. We don't know that as a fact. All we know is that when I run in, I'm out of breath and I'm guys, the British are coming, right? because I've already established the moment before. I don't sit here and go, okay, the British are coming, the British are coming. No, I want to create a realistic circumstance that I can react against so that my first line in the play reflects that, oh, something happened beforehand. Whether or not you know that, it's irrelevant. You just kind of look and go, oh, do tell, what else is happening, right? And again, you want to use this selectively, right? This should inform the characters' actions through their behavior, choices, and dialogue. What you don't want to do is explain everything as it happens, right? Or hey, why did you do this? Well, it's a great question. It started when I was 15, blah, 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 blah. You don't want any of that stuff. So here's a really great practical way. This is what actors sort of do when they have a script, right? They look at their script, they list a bunch of questions, right? And it informs them, it informs their performance. This is called working from the inside out. So I've created something that writers can do as well, right? Actors might go a lot deeper than this. You don't have to, just sort of, because everything is action-based in your screenplay, right? You can't write an emotion, like you shouldn't write how an actor feels about something. That's their job, right? Actors can't really act a thought or a feeling, but they can project feelings, right? And so if you ever write something in your script, Johnny walks up to the bar thinking about that one time he broke his girlfriend's heart, right? You might be thinking you're helping the actor, but you're not, right? Because the actor's like, well, how would I feel about this? Am I happy about this? All it would do is to create questions, right? So don't write what they're thinking. Johnny's been here before. He remembers that one time he did this and he knew what to do then and he knows what to do now. Like if you write that in your script, your actor's just going to be like, what the, come on. And a lot of writers do that, right? Actors cannot act a thought. But what they can do is they can build their backstory and their biographies, right? And if you do this, you won't have to write those thoughts. It'll already be here. And again, you don't have to give this to your actor, but this will inform how you write moving forward, right? So you start with the past. Where are they from? Do they have siblings, right? What was the dynamic like in the house growing up? What event from their childhood caused them to be where they are today? Now, this does not have to be some sort of trauma. It could be anything. But there's an event that happened as a child, and now they're doing this. When I was a child, I always wanted to be a firefighter, right? Whatever that is. What was the event? Oh, I saw a 60-minute story on blah, blah, blah. And what that'll do will also give you ideas to potentially incorporate some of this backstory into the script, right? Like, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe, yeah, let's show them as a kid watching 60 Minutes. So once we've built out their past, then I have what's called the present past. Now, this is literally just what happens before the script occurs, right? Real simple questions like, where do they live? How long have they lived there? What do they do for a living? Who are their friends who we're probably going to discover in the movie? But you know what? Let's just write them all down. What were they doing before they appeared for the first time in this script, right? This is great for secondary characters, right? Because primary characters, generally speaking, when you have your protagonist, we're following the protagonist. It's through their point of view through the entire thing. With your secondary characters, right, they'll show up at arbitrary times, right? The best friend, of the woman going through whatever it is that she's going through, the quirky, plucky, blah, 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 right? Instead of just kind of going stereotypically, well, what was she doing before she appeared in the script? Write that stuff down. What event occurred that led them to the beginning of the story? Now, this is not the inciting incident. This is literally the event that happens just before you start writing or just before the person appears. A great tip that I have, and I didn't put this in here, but I will just say it now, is if you want to write great protagonists and antagonists, I'm talking about people, because clearly you don't need a backstory for a shark. I mean, you could have one, but hungry must eat. All right, check. But if you look at our great film, Die Hard, right? You've got John McClane as the protagonist and Hans Gruber as the antagonist. Now, something that you can do that I do with all my scripts for fun as a great writing exercise is imagine a good antagonist is actually the protagonist in their version of the story, right? So whenever a protagonist enters the script that, or yeah, the protagonist, excuse me, whenever the antagonist, I'm sorry, enters the script that you're currently writing, imagine that they are actually entering when they come and show for the first time in the script, whether it's page 10, whether it's page 25, probably you want it in the first act, whatever that is, imagine that they are entering in the second act of their version of the story where the antagonist is actually the protagonist. So for example, if you look at Hans Gruber, which is interesting because Hans Gruber actually does show up at the beginning of Act 2, is what does the first act of his life look like? Well, he just appears, he's got all these bad guys, he's set this thing up. So maybe the first act is hiring the mercenaries, getting bankrolled, finding the computer wizard, developing things. Maybe he, the inciting incident of his story or the intro is he blows up a bank or something, or he does something that shows the audience that he's a, this thief. He maybe all the people that he worked with before, they all get, arrested and he's the only one that escapes. So he's got to build his team again. And then by the time he arrives at Nakatomi Plaza, he's got this full team, he's got this objective, he's got this plan. So that's a fun exercise that I like to do, is to take my antagonist, pretend that they're the protagonist of their story. And the second that they enter into the film that we're currently writing is actually the second act of their story. So it's a little pro tip for you. So then we have the present, right? What happens to them in the story you're telling, which is just basically what happens in your story, right? But how do they feel about it? This is where you want to create, judge, and justify. And you want to do 5 behavioral traits of your character that you will judge and justify. Then we go to the future. What do they hope to accomplish by going on this journey? Now, this isn't what do they accomplish. This is what they think their future is going to be before the story starts, right? Before everything starts. This will obviously change as the story goes on. John McClane flying to LA. I'm going to get, everything's going to be great. She's going to invite me to stay over. I'm going to give the bear to the kids. Life is going to be great. We're going to leave in 20 minutes after the party. And everything will be wonderful. What happens? He screws it up right at the beginning. And then he goes on this big thing and it's still the sort of objective, but now he's got to fight his way for it, right? That's what your character arc is. And then for the future, what are they afraid of in the future? And how do they plan or intend to live once the journey is finished? Like I said about John McClane, I want to do this, right? Now, it can be the same objective, right? It can be the same thing. The only difference is the distance between 2 points is not a straight line. It's fraught with all this stuff. So this is what actors do. So if you were to sort of look at this and sort of say, okay, and the reason I'm staying on this is, if you guys want to write this down or take a look, is once you have this sort of mapped out, your characters are going to, the writing of your characters is going to be so much more fluid and easier because you're going to know everything about them. So here's a great backstory. Arthur Fleck, Joker. I mean, this is pretty obvious. He grew up abused, neglected, and mentally ill in a broken society that nobody likes him, right? What's his wound? I mean, aside from the actual physical wounds and, the implied sexual abuse, he feels invisible and unworthy of love or respect, right? That's how he feels. That's his wound, right? What does he want? He wants to be seen, validated, and loved, right? He's a comedian. I want everyone to, enjoy me. And so everything's good. Haha, see, I'm funny. His present past, right? It's the moment he loses his job and stops taking his medication, right? That's sort of what's happening. That's actually more of an inciting incident. But if you look at, the scene where he's on the bus, his present past is he's on his way to his job that he's about to get fired for it, right? And this is what's going to set his transformation in motion. How it shows up His descent into sheer madness and violence feels inevitable because of his history. You know, it's like one of those sayings, like, you didn't stand a chance. So by crafting these rich backstories, you can create these characters that completely come to life. And it does seem like a lot of work, and it is to some degree, but it's going to save you a lot of time in the long run, because once you've done the work up front, you're going to get a lot less notes from your screenplay saying, yeah, your characters don't really feel lived in, or I'm not really buying that your character would blah, 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 blah. You do this, and then, you know, hopefully your notes will be on something that will be a lot easier to fix. Like, oh, that didn't occur to me to do this. Great. So finally, this is it. The big description of our favorite protagonist, John McClane, Die Hard. Now we're going to add backstory. Now, keep in mind, none of what I wrote here remotely exists in John McClane's story, right? I made it up. I mean, it could, but who knows? This is what an actor's going to do, right? So John McClane, seen it all, slightly cynical, third-generation cop. There's his backstory, whose father's legacy haunts him daily. Again, no idea that any of this is true. He has a wicked sense of humor and is super arrogant, projects sarcasm, and is an asshole, but that's because he's very good at being a cop and knows that the best way to get information out of people is to get a rise out of them. Not so great for his marriage, which is something his father was terrible at as well. John begrudgingly decides to come to Los Angeles to try and reconcile with his wife, Holly. He's stubborn and will never admit it, but he's resentful of his wife's success and in some ways thinks it's a failing on his part as the man in the relationship. His dad always said, you need to be the one who supports your wife and kids, right? So that's why he has that idea. He's at odds with these emotions because his father was a great cop, but a lousy husband. And despite his tough guy, wise ass veneer, John ultimately loves his wife and wants what's best for her, even if it's at odds with what he's always known, hence the inner conflict. So closing thoughts, my friends. This is how you bring your characters to life, right? They're not just black dots on a white page. Actors create them. They're shaped by their past. They're driven by their desires, and it's revealed through their actions. By thinking like actors, breaking down scripts, using techniques like judge and justify, and creating a solid backstory, writers can create characters that leap off the page, and it gives the actors more to play with, right? So as you develop your own stories, remember that the more you understand your characters, the more real they will feel to your audience, right? Every decision, every flaw, every hidden thought adds depth, making your characters unforgettable. Thank you for watching this. I hope it was helpful. If you want to talk to me, if you want to talk off stage and just say, hey, you know what? I had a couple questions. Listen, if I have the time for you, I will give it. My knowledge is always free. I want to be the best help that I can be to writers everywhere. So I invite you to email me here at mch@fastdraftmethod.com. And of course, you could follow me on YouTube, Instagram, and I have a private Facebook group for writers. My own, it's at Fast Draft. You can join. There's a big community. We have almost 1,000 people. And that's a great place to sort of connect with other writers. It's where I do a live Q&A, live stream AMA every Thursday at noon, where I can ask a lot of your questions. Like I said, my knowledge, I give it to you freely. However, my time, that's what costs. So if you want to go dive a little deeper, like I'm just scratching the surface here. If you want to go a little deeper, well, I'm not scratching the surface on this one, but if you want to go a little deeper, we can do a coaching. I'm happy to do coaching, and I'm happy to discuss whatever you want to discuss. So great. Thanks for everything. And yeah, I guess I have a little bit of time for a couple questions if you have any.
First of all, thank you. That was a ton of info. So I'm going to have to myself watch it over, but that's
why we do replays.
Yeah, no. Well, yes, we'll do that. We'll have that for everybody to watch afterwards. But one or two quick questions I have, and then there's a couple questions posed by those watching.
Great, I got 15 minutes. Shoot.
Okay, quickly. Mine is sort of about balancing intent versus having actors and directors think you're trying to tell them how to do their job. How does a writer sort of balance that in their script?
Yeah, quite simply. Well, here's the thing. Here's the larger answer to that is, you might have an intention of what you want to write, and your actor might do something a little differently, and your director might go, I don't care what the writer says, we're going to create something. Just know that when you're writing a screenplay and it becomes option and you're making a movie, I just want to say this on the onset, you are now inviting a bunch of creative partners to the table. That said, if you don't want to appear like you are overshooting your skis, quite simply, and do this I mentioned it in the webinar, is when you have a character, right? You've got the name, you've got the dialogue. Directly underneath, you have what's called the parenthetical. In your parenthetical, put the emotion that you want your character to say the line in. Really simply.
Right, because I have heard sometimes that the use of parentheticals by unproduced new writers is a touchy thing.
It's bullshit. No one cares. No one cares if you're unproduced. Honestly, they just care what's on the page. There's a lot of fallacies out there, guys. Like, a lot of people are saying, oh, don't ever do this or don't do this. Disregard all that information. I implore you as writers, the first thing that you need to do is to not stifle your creativity. Because if someone sees too many parentheticals, you're going to get a note. They're not going to go, oh, you're the worst screenwriter in the world. They're going to throw it away. They're just going to say, like, hey, man, less parentheticals. But if there's something that but here's what I would advise: pick and choose your battles, right? Like, what's the one line, that you really want them to put their stank on, and just put it in a parenthetical. Do not put action. Do not say, like, and I discussed this in formatting, my formatting webinar. So if you join me with that, I'm going to talk about all of this sort of do's and don'ts. But as far as like new writers, old writers, this, that, and the other thing, guys, the only rule is this, and I'm speaking from experience. There's only two things that you must master. One is story structure, right? Every script has the exact same structure, and the other is correct formatting. That's it. Anything else, the do's and don'ts, here's the deal, guys. Everyone's going to tell you not to do something. Don't do this. Don't ever do that. It's because they're justifying their job. But for every do's and don'ts, there's going to be like, damn, that was interesting. So don't be afraid. Like, dive in. You must know story structure, and you must know correct formatting. If you decide to write a script in Word and send it, no one's going to read it. If you decide, I don't give a damn about the break into Act 2, I'm just going to do whatever I want, no one's going to read it. And the objective for a screenplay is to get read and to get purchased and to be made. It's not poetry. You guys aren't, you're not it's not literary, style. That's what a book is. And if that's how you want to write, then great. I encourage that. I want you to be that. Just know that no one's going to make your movie.
Well, it also, it's funny because it seems like after listening to this, because this idea of these judgment blocks that, sort of really writing down in a concise way, understanding what you're trying to accomplish with these pages on characters is something probably worthwhile for all of us to go back to all the scripts we have sitting around that we've done and
100%.
and start working on those, because what you might find is that, well, you know what, this one's looking a little thin.
Well, and if ever you've received a note that said, hey, your characters, like, look at a note that you've received on your characters. And if it's, and then look back at this and say, is there anything in here that I can apply that will address that note? And the problem is a lot of notes are pretty broad stroke. They're like, oh, your characters are weak. Yeah, thanks, genius. That really doesn't tell me much. Can you be a little more specific?
But a lot of times we write characters and I know what they want to do on it, but maybe you haven't given the thought to the backstory of the history or certain aspects of their character that, again, when I look at that final description of John McClane, the bottom line is that's I get it.
Yeah.
And I sort of get where he's coming from and what he's looking for.
And that's what an actor would do, right? Like, I'm creating this thing. This is the way an actor would do it, right? Because they would know moving forward, every decision that they make. Guys, past is prologue, okay? Just remember that. Past is prologue. Everything that you've lived to your experience now as a human being is going to determine what you do moving forward. Your characters in the screenplay are the exact same.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple of quick user questions. And let's see. We might have to read these. I'm not sure they actually show up in the replay, but let's. Here's one. How do you avoid on the nose? As a writer, avoid on the nose dialogue. Oh, your mic's off.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My apologies. One more time. Sorry.
Okay, so it was about on the nose dialogue and how to
Mhm.
use a writer avoid it.
Okay, so here's the
Or
thing with
recognize it maybe in your work and say, oh, I want to change that up.
well, on the nose dialogue is how you recognize in your work is really simple. Is if you say something and then the character does the thing that you say, or if you do something and then the character says the thing that they do. Hey, Johnny, hand me the gun, and then Johnny hands him the gun. Okay, that's on the nose. You just get Johnny to hand him the gun, right? Okay, so that's the first thing. That's how you recognize on the nose dialogue is when you're actually saying the thing that you're about to do. Don't do that. How to change it. Now, here's what I would advise. Now, I teach a course called the fast draft method. And when you're writing your first draft of your screenplay, this is going to be a little antithetical, but your first draft, I want you to be as on the nose as humanly possible. Because when you go back to do your second draft, you at least know exactly what the intent of your characters are because they say it. Then what you should do is go, how can I say the same thing, but different? Here's an example. Someone kidnaps somebody. Father gets on the line. Don't you dare hurt my son. If you hurt a single hair on their head, I'm going to do everything in my power to murder you, even if it includes calling the police and shooting you dead, right? Like, obviously no one's going to say that, right? But that's the intention, right? The actor, the character, the dad is freaking out. He's mad. He's angry. He's going to just mess with this person. So how do you say the same but different, right? This is where you can get creative. Look at Taken. The movie I just know that I will find you. I have a very specific set of skills. He doesn't say what those set of skills are. He shows you in the movie, right? He comes in, he's like, oh shit, that's a real specific set of skills. But he warns them ahead of time. He doesn't say, I'm coming after you and I'm going to kill you. He says, look, if you hurt, like, I just want you to know that I have a very specific set of skills and I will use those skills, and those skills are just going to, cause an exorbitant amount of pain, right? That's the same but different, right? Instead of saying, don't touch a hair on his head or I will murder you, and you want to be creative, but you really want that line to stick, say something like, if you even look at them sideways, I will take a fork and stab you in both eyes. So that's the last thing that you see, right? Same thing, different.
Right. I mean, look, I guess actors probably key in a lot on when lines seem too obvious, and alternatively when, wow, that was a clever way to answer the question without necessarily just answering it.
Yeah, Hollywood is filled with the same but different. Right? I say this to writers all the time, and I say this with love and affection. You will never tell an original story, so don't try. There's been 3 original stories, and Homer has written 2 of them. Right? The Odyssey and the Iliad. There's no other original stories. That said, what your job is to be unique, because no 2 people can tell the same story the same. If I have a beat sheet that dictates every single thing that I'm supposed to tell in the story, and they give it to me, and they give the same beat sheet that the studio has mandated, you have to say everything on here, and they give it to Ben. Ben and I are going to come up with 2 completely different screenplays, even though the destinations are the same, because I do not have Ben's experience. So I bring my uniqueness to the job. So forget about originality. Take that pressure off your plate, but be unique. And nobody can do what you do because nobody has your brilliant mind. Nobody has your imagination. That's your special sauce.
Yay, let's go, writers.
No, seriously, once you have formatting and structure, I call it the canvas. No one has ever paid for the paint that is spilled on Picasso's easel, just what's on the canvas. Now, once you have that, everything else is your brilliant imagination. That's your paint. That's what you paint with.
One last quickie, because we're running out of time here, from someone, and that was, when you flesh out your characters, how many pages should that be? So just because we've been talking about these character descriptions, I mean, was what you put down for McClane, that's probably the kind of thing, or do you go into further depth? Because I mean, again, just as advice to people that are going to go
so obviously when you're writing this, you're not putting it in the script, right? This is just for you to inform. It can be whatever you want. Obviously, again, if a character shows up in 2 scenes, you don't need 10 pages. Here's what I would suggest. Really focus in on your protagonist, your antagonist, and then a couple of your secondary characters. And you'll notice that your secondary characters, their descriptions are going to be shorter because they have less screen time. There is no hard and fast rule. It's just do it until you can't think of anything else that you can think of this character. There's no, like I said, there's no rule. There's just, you want to create a depth, right? But just don't put that shit in your script, please. I can do one more if you have one more question.
We have one more, and it's a long one, so let me go. So it said, dialogue and action drive the story from scene to scene. I like to add, this is from Paul.
Okay.
Hold on a second. And he says, I like to add some throwaway lines in my stories that show some insight to a character, but don't necessarily drive the plot. Is that okay to do without being excessive?
Yeah, absolutely. If it is rooted in character, like, would your character say a throwaway line, right? Like, don't write arbitrary.
If you're trying to sort of point out something of a worldview or something they see, in a way that does sort of relate to the
100%. Here's the thing with dialogue and action, right? Okay, dialogue and action, dialogue serves two purposes. Number one, information. Number two, character, right? Like motivation. Information and motivation. Action is all about action, like movement, moving forward. Your characters, every single line that they say, just think about, what are they feeling at this moment? Like, what's the moment that they're feeling? It doesn't necessarily have to move it forward. Like, if you're having a conversation with someone and they're super frustrated, right? And they're sitting here, instead of saying like, I'm super frustrated, it's like, just, this is a throwaway line. Yeah, great insight, pal. You know what I mean? Like, it just becomes a throwaway thing where they throw it away, but it informs the emotion behind what's being said, right? What you don't want to do is, I can guarantee everybody in this webinar, myself included, you could literally go through every scene in your script, and I can promise you could probably cut the first two lines of dialogue in a scene and the last two, because they're the ones that are like, hey, how's it going? Good. How are you? Did you get the gun? You know what I mean? Like, who cares? You know what I mean? Those things you don't need to pad your screenplay with, right? But to your point, Paul, no, not everything needs to have this excessive weight. Just as long as your character would say that. So think of a behavioral trait that your character has and make sure they say it. That's whatever line you want them to say that's in line with their behavioral trait.
Because look, that attitude is going to come across later in something they're actually doing.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, listen, it's been over an hour, but an awesome hour. So I really
appreciate you. Yeah.
I want to thank you, Matt. And I want to be sure that everyone goes and checks out his website and his Facebook group, and we will hopefully be seeing more of Matt around.
Yeah. And also email me, guys. If you have any questions, I will answer your emails, but if it's super involved, then I'll just give you my rate sheet. Like, I'm not going to read your script, but I will read your script if you hire me to coach you.
Right.
But if you have questions, like, please, like, that's why I do the AMAs every Thursday. Right. But I'm only scratching the surface. If you want a deeper dive, it's a little more, but feel free. Like, my knowledge, always free. My time.
Right. Well, listen, thanks a lot, Matt. And
my pleasure.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see everybody soon.
All right. Peace out.
Bye, guys.